The Galactic Empire was a name spoken across 1,000 worlds, carried on the wings of fear and awe alike. Its banners stretched from one side of the Orion Arm to the other, its fleets patrolled trade lanes, and its governors bent entire civilizations to the will of the central throne. For 10,000 years, the Empire had known no rival. Civilizations that rose within its sphere either submitted willingly or were brought into harmony by the overwhelming strength of imperial arms. To the Empire, expansion was as natural as the tide. It did not advance because of need, but because it was inevitable. Each new discovery of life was catalogued, judged, and fitted into its great machine. The unremarkable races became workers, the more spirited became soldiers, and the rare, brilliant few found themselves given seats within the vast bureaucracies that managed countless star systems. So when reports reached the high admiralty of a young species calling itself humanity, interest was mild at best. Their fleets were small compared to imperial standards, their history was short, their colonies scattered. On paper, they looked like so many others, destined to be absorbed, their names remembered only in footnotes of imperial records. Yet the Empire was thorough. Protocol demanded that any growing civilization encountered at the border be assessed directly. And so an order was given. A fleet of observation and enforcement would be dispatched to the sector known locally as the Sol Fringe. It was not a grand fleet by imperial standards, merely 200 warships supported by dreadnoughts, and cruisers, enough to conquer entire clusters of less developed worlds. Their hulls were lined with centuries of refinements, their weapons tuned to perfection. This was not a mission of war, but of demonstration. The Empire had long ago learned that a display of force often succeeded where words alone failed. When the Imperial fleet emerged from the darkness of hyperspace, the stars glittered ahead like scattered diamonds. Before them stretched the sector of space that humans claimed as their frontier. To the admirals it seemed quiet, almost fragile. The light of young colonies shone faintly across scattered systems, linked by trade routes that had yet to fully grow. A civilization in its adolescence, untested, unscarred by the weight of galactic history. Admiral Corvus, a veteran of 100 campaigns, stood at the command dais of the flagship Invicta. His mandibles clicked together in satisfaction as the first scans appeared on the tactical displays. "Primitive," he muttered, his voice resonant in the chamber. "A scattering of colonies, a few fleets. Their hulls are small, their weapons crude. This will be quick." Around him, officers nodded in agreement. The Empire had seen this countless times before. Yet, as the data refined, something unusual crept into the readings. Human ships were indeed present, but they were organized with a discipline that did not fit the usual pattern of a young race. Fleets held formation at the edges of known space, not rushing forward, not retreating, simply waiting. "They know we are here," an officer observed. Admiral Corvus gave a dismissive wave. "Of course they know. What matters is what they do with that knowledge. And from the looks of it, they do nothing." The fleet pressed deeper, engines glowing against the velvet dark. Imperial banners shone across every broadcast channel, announcing their arrival as if to remind the humans of the power that had come to their doorstep. On the bridge of the Invicta, the atmosphere was one of inevitability. The humans would be summoned. They would be told the terms of submission. They would protest, as all races did. Then, as always, they would bend. But out beyond the sensors, silent in the void, the Terran fleet remained perfectly still. Ships of sleek design, with angles that seemed to shift even as scanners tried to pin them down, lingered in the darkness. Their numbers were modest compared to the Empire's armada, yet something about their posture was unsettling. They did not form defensive walls, nor did they scatter to hide. Instead, they held formation with a precision that suggested preparation, as though they had been expecting this confrontation. The admirals noted it. but none gave it weight. To them, humans were untested. No matter how disciplined, no matter how clever, no civilization could resist the tide of the Empire forever. Admiral Corvus leaned forward, mandibles tightening with certainty. "Signal them," he ordered. "Let us begin their education." Across the void, the Empire's words prepared to cross the stars, heavy with the authority of millennia. But as the message prepared to transmit, humanity listened in silence, their ships unmoving. And somewhere, hidden behind the stillness, a quiet smile formed, unseen yet certain, because humans already knew what was coming. The Empire's message carried all the weight of tradition. Spoken in the common galactic tongue, it was the same declaration of supremacy that had been delivered to countless worlds before. A warning wrapped in politeness, a demand dressed as an invitation. This is the voice of the Galactic Empire. You stand at the edge of our dominion. Your presence is acknowledged, but your independence cannot remain. To resist is futile. To accept is wise. You will surrender your fleets and offer tribute. In return, you will be protected and permitted to serve within the order of civilization. Refusal will bring consequences. The words left the transmitters aboard the Invicta and spread across the sector on beams of light. To the Imperial fleet, this moment was routine. They had seen it play out 100 times. Nervous chatter from alien ships, hurried calls for negotiation, sometimes desperate pleas for mercy. Every admiral knew the rhythm of submission. But humanity's reply did not follow the script. A single transmission came back, encoded with a precision that Imperial decoders handled effortlessly. It was short, simple, unemotional, acknowledged. That was all. No panic, no bargaining, no speeches, just one word, clinical and steady, as if the Empire's arrival had been a scheduled event rather than an existential threat. On the Invictas. "Bridge?" Admiral Corvus clicked his mandibles together in annoyance. "That is all they have to say?" "Yes, Admiral," replied the communications officer. The message was transmitted once, directly, and then silence. No secondary transmissions, no background chatter. Their networks remained locked tight. Corvus turned his gaze toward the tactical displays. The Terran fleet still hovered at the edge of sensor range, unmoving, disciplined. Their formation was like a wall of steel, yet there was no sign of panic or disarray. Ships held their positions with unwavering precision, as if waiting for something. The Admiral narrowed his eyes. They do not understand the situation. Perhaps their leaders are slow to respond. Continue the scans. Obediently, the crews of the Invicta and her sister ships expanded their sweeps. Energy readings, structural analyses, life sign assessments, all poured into the Imperial databases. Yet something strange emerged. The scans were incomplete. Where one ship should have been easy to classify, its edges sharp and clear, the Terran vessels seemed to resist full resolution. Their hulls bent light in subtle ways, making outlines blur and shift. Computer models struggled to calculate exact dimensions. Energy signatures appeared erratic, spiking one moment and falling the next, as if the ships were wrapped in layers of interference. At first, the analysts assumed a fault in the equipment. Imperial sensors were unmatched, refined across centuries of conquest. But a second pass revealed the same distortions. A third pass confirmed it further. Something was actively interfering with the readings, though no traditional countermeasures could be identified. The officers whispered among themselves. One murmured, "It is as though the ships do not want to be seen." Corvus struck his staff against the deck. "Nonsense. They are using crude masking technologies. Tricks. Nothing. More. Once we fire, their illusions will crumble." But unease lingered in the air. For most young civilizations, the first sight of the Empire brought terror. Fleets scattered, governments begged, colonies abandoned their defenses. Yet here was a race that did none of those things. Instead, they sent one word, acknowledged, and then waited. Their ships cloaked in mysteries the Empire could not quite unravel. Hours passed. The Imperial fleet advanced deeper into Terran space, broadcasting its demands across multiple channels. Still, the humans refused to respond with fear or anger. They maintained silence, as though listening. The analysts grew restless. Reports piled on Corvus's desk, each one filled with data that did not fit neatly into the expected patterns. Hull compositions hinted at alloys beyond standard Imperial knowledge. Drive signatures flickered in ways that suggested multiple layered systems working in tandem. And then there was the synchronization. Perfect, unbroken, as if every Terran vessel was following the heartbeat of a single mind. Corvus dismissed it all. Young races are reckless. They build strange weapons, unstable ships. It does not matter. Discipline comes only with centuries, and centuries they do not have. Yet beneath his stern tone, even he felt a faint unease. The humans were not panicking. They were not pleading. They were watching. From the surface of colonies scattered. Across the Sol fringe, human citizens stood beneath their skies and looked upward. Vast networks of observatories, military outposts, and deep space relays monitored every movement of the Imperial fleet. Across Earth itself, within vast chambers buried beneath oceans and mountains, strategists and scientists studied the unfolding encounter. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Empire had stepped into human space. And humanity, instead of trembling, observed with a calm that bordered on unsettling. They had prepared for this day. They had known it would come. And though the Empire did not yet understand, every silent ship in the Terran fleet carried the weight of that preparation. On the Invicta, Corvus folded his arms. If they will not respond properly, then we will give them reason to. Ready the formal ultimatum, and this time, include a demonstration. The officers obeyed, unaware that, in the stillness of the void, humanity was already smiling. The Empire's second message was not merely a declaration, it was an ultimatum. Carried across encrypted channels in dozens of languages, it left no room for misunderstanding. This is the voice of the Galactic Empire. You have been given time to consider our offer. Your silence is taken as defiance. You will submit your fleets, your colonies, and your sovereignty to the Emperor's will. You will provide tribute in resources and service. You will kneel, or you will be made to kneel. On the bridge of the Invicta, Admiral Corvus stood tall as the words echoed across the chamber. His staff struck the floor with each pronouncement, punctuating the power of the Empire's decree. Around him, the officers wore the calm expressions of certainty, the same composure drilled into them by centuries of tradition. To them, this was routine. Another world brought into the fold, another name added to the endless registry of conquered peoples. Yet the reply that returned from the Terrans was unlike any Corvus had ever heard. The transmission began not with anger nor with desperation, but with a calm, measured tone. The voice was human, steady, and resonant. We acknowledge your presence, we acknowledge your terms, and we extend our gratitude for your introduction. For a moment, silence filled the Imperial bridge. The words were polite, almost unnervingly so. Gratitude? None had ever thanked the Empire for its ultimatums. Before the officers could parse the strangeness of it, the message continued. Before we decide our response, we invite you to observe a demonstration. We believe it will clarify matters. Then the channel cut. The officers turned to their admiral, unsure how to interpret such a reply. Corvus's mandibles twitched in irritation. A demonstration? He scoffed. What arrogance! Do they think to frighten us with their toys? But still the words lingered in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. The humans had not resisted. They had not begged. Instead, they had offered an invitation. Corvus shook the thought away. Signal them again. Demand specifics. This is nothing but stalling. The signal went out, but no reply came. The Terran fleet remained motionless, their formations tight and disciplined, as though waiting for the next move. Meanwhile, the analysts were already dissecting the human message. Voice tone, pacing, background noise, all were studied with forensic precision. The results were unsettling. There was no trace of fear, no signs of stress or urgency. Whoever had spoken had done so, with absolute calm, their heart rate steady, their words deliberate. "This is calculated," one officer muttered under his breath. "They are not improvising. They want us to hear that tone." The report was quietly suppressed. The Empire thrived on certainty, not doubt. Across the void within the flagship of the Terran fleet, the mood could not have been more different. The command deck was quiet, lit by the soft glow of holographic displays. Strategists observed the Empire's armada with the same patience that a hunter gave to its prey. Every Imperial movement, every adjustment in formation was tracked and catalogued. "They are behaving exactly as expected," one analyst said, her voice calm. "Pride blinds them. They believe this is another conquest. They have not yet realized the imbalance." The human commander, a figure known simply as Marshal Arden, nodded. His gaze lingered on the shimmering icons that represented the Empire's ships. Let them think so. The longer they believe they are in control, the more powerful the moment of revelation will be. Back aboard the Invicta, impatience was spreading. Hours had passed since the humans' cryptic message, and the admirals were growing restless. Corvus finally slammed his staff into the dais. "Enough waiting. If they will not respond, we will show them the price of arrogance. Prepare the fleet for a live fire demonstration. A colony world nearby will suffice. But before the order could be transmitted, the Terran fleet moved. Not much. Not the chaos of retreat or the aggression of attack. Just a single adjustment. Ships sliding into a new formation with absolute synchronicity, like a school of predators shifting direction, as one. The Empire's sensors lit up, registering the movement instantly. Every Terran ship aligned itself with mathematical precision, hulls angled toward the Imperial fleet, their silhouettes sharp against the void. Corvus's irritation faded into something colder. He did not like how deliberate it all felt. "Report," he demanded. The analyst spoke hesitantly. "Admiral, their formation is defensive but not passive. They are positioning as though expecting an exchange of fire." Corvus hissed. "So be it. They want a demonstration? They shall have one." Yet in the quiet corners of the bridge, some officers glanced at one another uneasily. The humans had invited the Empire to watch. They had shifted their formation, not in panic, but in confidence. And behind their silence, there was the faintest sense, impossible to ignore, that the humans were smiling. The void was silent after the Empire's opening salvo. Imperial plasma bolts, rail slugs, and missiles had crossed the Gulf with terrifying brilliance, a storm of destruction that had ended countless wars before they began. And yet, as the last detonations faded into silence, the Terran fleet remained untouched. At first, the bridge of the Invicta erupted in confusion. "Direct hits confirmed," shouted one officer. "Negative," countered another. "All impacts dispersed. Readings inconsistent, hold, recalibrating." The displays told the story more clearly than words. Where the blasts should have torn hulls apart, there was only distortion. Plasma streams bent away, rail slugs twisted off course, missiles spun wildly before detonating in empty space. The Terran fleet had not dodged, had not countered with point defense. They had simply endured. Admiral Corvus rose slowly from his command dais, his mandibles clenched. "Explain," he growled. The chief analyst's hands trembled as he called, "Up the data." "Admiral?" Our weapons did not miss. They shifted. The trajectories bent as though the targets were not where our sensors said they were. It is not shielding. It is manipulation, Corvus snapped. Manipulation of what? The analyst swallowed. Of space itself. The words fell heavy on the command deck. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Shield technology, countermeasures, hardened armor. All of those were familiar. But altering the battlefield itself? That was something else entirely. The admiral slammed his staff on the deck. Nonsense. No fleet can maintain that kind of distortion. The energy requirements would collapse their drives. Their ships would burn themselves out. But the readings disagreed. Terran power signatures remained steady. No sign of strain. No surges of uncontrolled output. Their vessels radiated calm efficiency, as though the display had cost them nothing. And then, the humans moved. Not in panic. Not in counterattack. Their ships slid into new positions with glacial precision, every vessel adjusting as though guided, by a single hand. 100 hulls pivoted, aligned, and locked into place in perfect synchrony. On the tactical display, the pattern was unmistakable. They're forming a wall, an officer whispered. No, another corrected, eyes wide. Not a wall. A mirror. The formation gleamed with eerie symmetry. Each Terran vessel positioned to reflect the stance of its neighbor, creating a lattice across the stars. It was not defensive, nor offensive. It was demonstrative. Corvus's claws tightened on his staff. His instincts, honed by centuries of command, screamed that this was no mere coincidence. This was not improvisation. The humans had rehearsed this, perhaps countless times, waiting for the moment it would be required. They're toying with us, he muttered under his breath. On cue, the Terran fleet released energy, not as a weapon, but as light. Brilliant arcs of color stretched outward, weaving across the lattice. Circles, lines, and spirals blazed against the darkness, forming patterns too precise to be random. Entire constellations bent with the display, their starlight refracted into geometric perfection. On the Invicta's bridge, silence fell. Officers who had never known fear found themselves transfixed. The Terrans were not firing on them. They were showing them something. Control, elegance, and mastery far beyond what the Empire had imagined possible. It's a projection, one officer whispered, almost reverent. Not a weapon. A message. Corvus bristled. A message of arrogance. They think to intimidate us with illusions. But deep inside, doubt gnawed at him. Illusions did not bend sensors. Illusions did not warp trajectories. Illusions did not leave Imperial weapons flailing uselessly against the void. The display reached its zenith. For a moment, the stars themselves seemed to bow to Terran will. Then, just as suddenly, the light collapsed inward. The formations returned to silence, ships dark and still, waiting. Not a shot fired, not a ship lost. The Admiral clenched his fists. They are mocking us, he growled. Yet even as he spoke, his officers avoided his gaze, because every one of them had felt it. The demonstration had not been mockery. It had been confidence. The Terrans had revealed only a glimpse of their power, enough to terrify, enough to intrigue, enough to say without words, "We are not prey." The Empire had demanded submission. Humanity had replied with a smile. The corridors of the Invicta pulsed with a nervous energy rarely felt within an Imperial flagship. Officers moved quickly, voices lowered, datapads clutched tightly to their chests. The usual rhythm of confidence, efficient, sharp, assured, was gone. In its place was something the Empire was unaccustomed to: doubt. On the command deck, Admiral Corvus sat rigid in his chair, mandibles twitching in irritation as reports piled around him. Every division had been tasked with analyzing the Terran fleet's display. And yet, every report came back the same: confusing, contradictory, and incomplete. "Explain again," he demanded, his voice a low growl, as the chief analyst presented his findings. The analyst cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, we measured extreme energy output from the Terran vessels, but it did not follow any recognizable pattern. Their emissions spike well above known tolerances, yet show no sign of reactor strain. Our models suggest layered systems, possibly drives, shields, and weapons all working together, but we cannot isolate any of them. Their technology is either extremely advanced or deliberately disguised." "Disguised?" Corvus snapped. "Yes, Admiral," the analyst said, swallowing. "The distortion fields that bent our weapons. They are not simply defenses. They interfere with our sensors at a fundamental level. It is as if the Terrans want us to see only fragments. They are curating what we can observe." Corvus's staff slammed against the deck with a sharp crack. "So they are tricking us! Sleight of hand, nothing more." The analyst hesitated, then chose his words carefully. "If it is a trick, Admiral, it is one beyond our ability to pierce." The words unsettled the room. Across the fleet, similar conversations unfolded. On the bridge of the cruiser Talon's Edge, junior officers whispered that the humans had bent space itself. Aboard the destroyer Merciless Dawn, technicians swore the Terran ships had vanished entirely from their instruments for a fraction of a second. In the science division, murmurs grew that the humans might have mastered forms of physics the Empire had dismissed as impossible. The Empire had long believed that knowledge was its greatest weapon. Its archives stretched back millennia, containing every scientific triumph of its conquests. To encounter something outside that catalog was rare. To encounter something they could not even begin to explain, unthinkable. And yet, the Terrans had given them exactly that. Corvus convened a council of his senior officers. They gathered around the great tactical display, the human fleet rendered as glowing icons hovering in the void. "They have shown us their hand," Corvus declared. "Illusions and parlor tricks, nothing more." A captain raised his brow ridges. "With respect, Admiral, no illusion can disable an entire missile volley mid-flight, nor bend plasma streams, nor—" "Enough!" Corvus barked. His voice rang with authority, but the edge of desperation was audible. "You speak as though they are our equals. They are not. They are a young race, barely begun in the galactic theater. What they displayed is dangerous, yes, but not insurmountable. Our strength lies in scale, in power. No matter their toys, they cannot match the Empire's armadas." The words sounded convincing, but even as they left his mouth, Corvus saw the flicker of doubt in the eyes around him. Elsewhere, across human space, the Terran fleet waited. Inside the command deck of the Terran flagship, Marshal Arden watched the Empire's movements through layers of tactical projections. His staff worked silently, every gesture precise, every calculation swift. Unlike the Empire, there was no confusion here. The Terrans knew exactly what they had shown, and exactly what they had hidden. "The Empire will not retreat yet, one," strategist murmured. "Their pride will not allow it. They will test us again." Arden nodded slowly. "Let them. Each test reveals more of them than of us." Back aboard the Invicta, the mood darkened further. Reports filtered in from forward scouts. Probes sent closer to the Terran fleet returned corrupted data or nothing at all. Ships that approached too near found their navigational systems scrambled, their engines briefly unresponsive until pulled back. The word spread quickly among the crews. Cursed. The humans' silence only fed the rumors. They had spoken little since their cryptic invitation, their calm voice echoing in every officer's memory. "We invite you to observe a demonstration." It was not a threat, not even a demand, yet it lingered heavier than any ultimatum. In the Imperial Council chamber, one captain finally voiced what many thought. "Admiral, if this is what they show us when they are calm, what will they unleash?" If we force their hand. Corvus did not answer immediately. His mandibles clicked softly as his eyes remained fixed on the Terran formation. Silent. Waiting. Watching. Finally, he growled, "Then we will force them, and we will learn the truth." The Imperial fleet had always been a hammer, and every new species encountered was the nail. This certainty had guided the Empire for millennia. Resistance was temporary, submission inevitable. But here, facing the Terran fleet, that certainty was beginning to crack. Admiral Corvus felt it in the quiet between orders, in the way his officers avoided his gaze, in the unease that clung to the command deck like smoke. And yet pride was a force of its own. He would not allow hesitation to be mistaken for weakness. "Signal the fleet," Corvus commanded. His staff struck the deck with a sharp clang. "No more warnings, full assault formation. Crush their defenses. Show them what defiance brings." Across 200 Imperial warships, engines roared and weapons locked into position. Massive dreadnoughts shifted forward, their broad hulls bristling with cannons. Cruisers and destroyers spread into attack wings, forming the encircling jaws of a predator. The void filled with the glow of charging weapons, plasma cannons, particle beams, rail projectors, all primed to unleash devastation. On the tactical display, the Terran fleet remained motionless. Their ships, still arrayed in perfect formation, gave no sign of panic. To Corvus, their stillness was an insult. To his officers, it was unnerving. "Admiral," one captain ventured cautiously, "their lack of reaction suggests confidence." "Perhaps." "Enough," Corvus snapped. "They are bluffing. Fire!" The order spread through the fleet like a spark through dry grass. The void exploded with fury. Plasma streams cut across the darkness. Beams of condensed energy lanced forward. Rail slugs hurtled at impossible speeds. It was a barrage designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses, a storm no young race could possibly survive. And yet the Terrans did not flinch. Their response was quiet, subtle, terrifying. As the Imperial volleys neared their targets, the distortions returned. Space itself seemed to ripple around the Terran hulls, bending trajectories, scattering beams, twisting slugs into harmless spirals. Entire missile swarms lost guidance, detonating in dazzling blossoms far from the fleet. The humans still had not fired a single shot. Corvus's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Again! Increase fire! Overwhelm their distortions!" The fleet obeyed. More weapons ignited, the void becoming a sea of light and thunder. But no matter how much power they poured into the assault, the results were the same. Every blast lost its way. Every strike fell harmless. Then the Terrans moved. Their fleet shifted as one, flowing like a single organism. Not into attack positions, but into new alignments. Icons on the tactical display pulsed with energy readings that spiked to impossible levels. "Admiral," the chief analyst whispered, "they're targeting us." Before Corvus could bark an order, the first Imperial cruiser went dark. Its weapons shut down, its drives sputtered, its lights flickered out. Moments later, another ship followed, then a destroyer, then two more. "Report!" Corvus demanded. "Systems disabled," came the reply. "Not destroyed, just shut off. Weapons, engines, even life support, all locked down simultaneously. No damage to the hulls, no casualties reported." Across the fleet, panic began to bloom. Ship after ship went dark, one by one, in precise rhythm, as if the Terrans were plucking strings on an invisible instrument. Crews scrambled to restart systems, but every attempt failed. Consoles refused input, engines ignored commands, weapons would not respond. It was as if the ships themselves had chosen to obey a new master. The Terrans had not fired missiles. They had not unleashed plasma. They had simply reached out and silenced Imperial warships at will. On the Invicta, the bridge was suffocatingly silent. Officers who had seen 100 battles stared wide-eyed at their consoles, watching their comrades' vessels drift powerless in the void. Corvus's mandibles trembled. "What? What have they done?" The analyst's voice shook. "Admiral, it's as if they have overridden us. Their systems reached into ours and switched them off." "Impossible!" Corvus roared. But even as he said it, another dreadnought went dark. Then another. Within minutes, nearly a quarter of the Imperial fleet floated powerless, their crews alive but helpless. The Terran fleet remained untouched, their formation calm, their weapons silent. Finally, a message arrived. It was short, carried on an open channel. The same calm voice as before spoke. "We ask again. Observe." And then, silence. The Empire's greatest fleet had attacked with full fury. The Terrans had not killed a single soul, had not destroyed a single hull. They had merely reached out, disabled, and waited. On the Invicta's bridge, fear crept into the officers' eyes. For the first time, they faced an enemy that did not fight to win, but to show. And in that silence, one terrible truth became clear. The humans were not defending. They were demonstrating. The command deck of the Invicta felt colder than the void outside. Consoles glowed softly, but many officers refused to look at them, as though the numbers and readings might confirm what they dreaded to admit. The silence was not the silence of discipline, but of shock. The collective pause of warriors confronted with something beyond their comprehension. Admiral Corvus stood rigid in the center, his mandibles clicking softly, the only sound in the chamber. Around him, hollow displays showed drifting Imperial warships, powerless hulks caught in an invisible grip. Yet every scan confirmed the same unsettling fact. Not one had been harmed. Crews were alive, hulls intact, systems simply dormant for the Empire. A display of mercy was more terrifying than destruction. A captain broke the silence at last. "Admiral, why have they spared us?" His voice trembled, betraying more than simple curiosity. It was fear, the fear of a predator. That did not kill because it did not need to. Corvus did not answer. He stared at the calm Terran formation, still holding perfect lines, still utterly still. No gloating transmissions, no demands, just silence, heavy and deliberate. The fleet's officers whispered among themselves. They could have annihilated us. They didn't even fire weapons. What kind of power chooses not to kill? Corvus slammed his staff against the deck. The sound silenced them, but not their doubts. Enough. They are not gods. They are not beyond defeat. This is strategy. Psychological warfare. Do not let their display rattle you. But even as he said it, he could see in their eyes that it had. The Empire's culture thrived on dominance. To show weakness was death. Yet here was an enemy that had overturned every expectation, not through overwhelming violence, but through restraint. Mercy, in this context, was not compassion. It was humiliation. It was a quiet declaration. We hold your fate in our hands, and we choose to let you live. Elsewhere across the fleet, messages poured in from powerless vessels. Crews described the sensation of being completely helpless, their controls unresponsive, their ships reduced to husks. Engineers swore their systems were untouched, only locked by some force they could not explain. Officers whispered of despair, admitting that no amount of training prepared them for this kind of defeat. The Imperial hierarchy trembled under the weight of this revelation. One of Corvus's senior advisors leaned close. "Admiral, we must consider withdrawal. If we press further, we risk losing the entire fleet. Already the Council on the homeworld is watching. If we squander our strength here," Corvus spun on him, fury in his eyes. "Withdrawal is surrender. Do you suggest we crawl back to the Emperor and admit we were outmatched by a race of primitives?" The advisor held his ground. "Better. to admit caution than to deliver wreckage. The humans are not primitives. They are something else entirely. And we do not yet understand them. The words spread through the command deck like wildfire. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, and no one spoke in defense of Corvus's pride. For the first time in his long career, Corvus felt the weight of doubt pressing against his authority. On the other side of the void, aboard the Terran flagship, Marshal Arden watched patiently. His staff had predicted this moment with eerie accuracy, the tipping point where arrogance gave way to fear, where fear reshaped into reluctant respect. "They will not retreat yet," Arden said quietly, his gaze never leaving the tactical display. "But they will not strike again with the same confidence. The lesson is sinking in." One of his aides asked, "Should we press our advantage, Marshal?" Arden shook his head. "No, let them think. Reflection is more powerful than destruction. If they cannot grasp the scale of our power, no amount of fire will convince them. But if they grasp it on their own—" He paused, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "They will carry that understanding home." Back aboard the Invicta, Corvus convened a smaller council with his most trusted officers. The chamber was dim, the atmosphere thick with tension. "The humans have made their message clear," said one captain bluntly. "They do not seek to kill us. They seek to teach us. We should heed it." Another officer disagreed. "Heed it? They insult us. They strip our ships of power as if swatting insects, then bid us sit quietly. It is intolerable." "But effective," the first captain retorted. "Do you not see? They have already defeated us without bloodshed. To continue is to invite disaster." Corvus listened, torn between the pride of command and the gnawing truth that whispered at the edges of his thoughts. The Empire had never faced such an enemy before. To retreat would fracture his reputation. To press forward would risk annihilation. Or, worse, humiliation on a scale no empire could endure. Finally, Corvus dismissed them, standing alone before the great viewing window. Beyond the glass stretched the Terran fleet, silent, patient, unyielding. He could almost feel their eyes upon him, not as prey, not as rivals, but as something else, an audience to the Empire's struggle with its own pride. For the first time, Corvus wondered if perhaps the humans were not waiting for war, but for recognition, and that thought unsettled him more than any weapon. The Imperial fleet drifted in uneasy silence. Dozens of its most formidable warships remained dark, their engines and weapons shut down by Terran interference. The rest lingered on edge, every captain uncertain whether the next moment would bring further humiliation or annihilation. On the Invicta, Admiral Corvus stood at the center of the command deck, surrounded by officers who had long since stopped disguising their unease. Their eyes flicked to the glowing icons of disabled vessels, then to the perfectly steady formation of Terran ships across the void. Not one human vessel had moved out of line. Not one had faltered. Corvus's claws dug into the edge of the command table. Pride screamed within him to strike again, to unleash what remained of his fleet's fury, to die in defiance rather than bend before an upstart species. Yet beneath that pride, another voice whispered, colder, sharper, undeniable. "This is not defiance. This is suicide." The Terrans had not killed a single Imperial soldier. They had not destroyed a single ship. They had only demonstrated control, and that restraint had left the Empire's might looking pitiful, like a child, waving a weapon that no longer frightened anyone. The chamber's silence was broken by the chief communications officer. "Admiral, we are receiving another transmission." Corvus snapped his head up. "From the humans?" "Yes, Admiral. Broad spectrum, open channel." The voice that filled the deck was the same calm, measured tone that had spoken before. "No arrogance, no venom, only the unsettling patience of one who held every advantage. "Imperial fleet," the voice said. "You have witnessed our capability. We will not destroy you unless destruction is forced. We ask again. Observe. Learn. Return home knowing that humanity desires peace but will not suffer domination." The message ended. No further demands. No ultimatum. Just a statement. A choice. Left hanging in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. The Empire was accustomed to enemies groveling, begging, offering tribute. But here was a race that made. No demands of wealth, territory, or surrender. Instead, they asked only for recognition and dared the Empire to misunderstand. One captain finally broke the silence. "Admiral, if we remain, we risk more of our fleet disabled. If we strike, again, we risk the humiliation of utter helplessness. But if we retreat—" He hesitated, glancing at the silent officers around him. "If we retreat, we live, and the Empire endures." Corvus's mandibles clicked in agitation. Retreat. The word seared his pride. He imagined the Emperor's fury, the shame of admitting the fleet had been held in check. Yet he also imagined the alternative: drifting wreckage, no survivors. A lesson written in blood instead of restraint. The humans had given him a choice, and he knew which one the Empire would survive. "Signal the fleet," Corvus said at last, his voice low, steady. "Prepare withdrawal. Order all vessels to maintain formation. We leave this system intact." A ripple of relief swept across the deck, quickly hidden behind disciplined nods. Officers moved with new purpose, transmitting orders, igniting engines, re-establishing coordination. The message was clear. They would live to fight another day. Yet beneath that relief, an unspoken truth lingered. They had not truly chosen to retreat. The humans had allowed them to. As the Imperial fleet began its slow turn, the Terran ships moved only slightly, parting their formation just enough to grant a clear path. It was not submission. It was not threat. It was a gesture, a corridor through which the humbled predators of the galaxy could pass. Corvus's gaze locked on the Terran flagship. For a moment, he felt as though the vessel itself were watching him, silent and patient, waiting for his decision. His mandibles clenched, and he forced himself to nod, an acknowledgement no one else would ever see. The Invicta led the fleet into retreat, engines flaring as one by one Imperial ships slipped into faster-than-light corridors. Disabled vessels regained power only once the humans allowed it, as though granting permission for them to leave. Not a single shot was fired in pursuit. Not a single insult followed. When the last Imperial vessel crossed the threshold of safe distance, Corvus stood alone at the viewing window, watching the Terran formation vanish into the distance. "They did not defeat us," he muttered under his breath, as though saying it aloud could make it true. But even he did not believe the words. Back aboard the Terran flagship, Marshal Arden watched the retreat in silence. His staff murmured in relief, some celebrating quietly. Yet Arden did not smile. He understood the deeper significance. "They will return," he said softly. "But next time, they will not come with blind arrogance. They will come with fear, and with questions." One aide frowned. "And what shall we give them then, Marshal?" Arden's eyes never left the void. "Answers if they seek them, silence if they do not. But one truth will remain: humanity does not kneel." Far from the system, the Imperial fleet hurtled toward home, carrying with it a wound deeper than any physical loss. They had seen what the Terrans were capable of. They had felt mercy used as a weapon sharper than any blade. And though no songs would be sung, no monuments built, every captain, every officer, every soldier aboard those ships knew the truth. Humanity had smiled at the Empire's fury, and the Empire had blinked first,